Oh, all the money that e'er I spend it in good company.
I want to thank everybody for coming to IBAM. Definitely a jewel in the crown of cultural events here at the center that we have on an annual basis, and we're very honored and thrilled to have Derek Warfield here to join us to give us a brief talk here. He's going to discuss rebel songs and why we sing them. And Derek, of course, is a founding member of the legendary band Wolfe Tones, the current leader of Derek Warfield and the Young Wolfe Tones. He's an outstanding singer, stage personality, composer, and historian of the music and song. And a prolific solo artist with an astonishing 11 albums in just over the last decade. He writes about his passions in his books, The Irish Songster, The American Civil War, and the Songs and Ballads of 1798. And they're both available in the back here for purchase and also downstairs. I'd like you to please give a warm and welcome to Derek.
I want to thank you, and first of all I'd like to apologise to you for the late start. And I know that I deeply appreciate your attendance here today. Because I'm speaking about a subject that has been with me all my life. And as many of you know, the heritage of Irish music and song has been with the Irish people since our first recorded texts were written. The oldest texts in Irish history make references to music. They say that a life without music was not worth living. So our heritage, and the heritage I'm sure many of you share, if not all of you, indeed has been very much a part of the Irish people since the dawn of civilization in Ireland. Ireland is a very old country. Although we're close geographically to the rest of Europe, we evolved a very different, indeed, set of civilization and social laws that governed our country for many thousands of years. I'm speaking about the song, so I'm going to start with a song, just to illustrate to you the importance that songs have been to the Irish people. I'm going to start with a song that was written in the 19th century. It was written around the 1860s. It was written by a 26-year-old school teacher. He died at the young age of 26. But the songs never did. And I'll just stop it there, folks. If you want to sit down, there's some seats here. Yes? So this 26-year-old school teacher, I'm starting off just to make a point of the importance of Irish songs. Because I think you realise after I speak about it, its importance and the importance of this author, the composer. The song is called Rising the Moon.
In the old spot by the river, right alone to you and me. One more mirthful signal token, whistle of the marching tune. To which a pike upon your shoulder, at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. Which a pike upon your shoulder, at the rising of the moon. Oh, then tell me, Sean O'Farrell, tell me why you hurry so. Hush, Mogo, hush and listen, and your cheeks were all aglow. I bet others from the captain get you ready quick and soon, for the pikes must be together by the rising of the moon, by the rising of the moon. that singing the word there that blossom never steel, and above their shining weapons hung their own beloved green, that to every foe and traitor forward strike a marching shoe, and Killarney boys for freedom is the rising of the moon, is the rising of the moon, is the rising of the moon, and Killarney boys for freedom is the rising of the moon, is the rising of the moon, is the rising of the moon, then Killarney boys for freedom is the rising of the moon.
Well, that song was written by Leo Keegan Casey. He was a young man, he was a school teacher in Westmeath. His father was a school teacher. His grandfather was a head school master. And he came from a long line of a family that sought to bring enlightenment to the people of his community and district. And he lived at a time in Ireland that there was little hope for the people, or indeed our country. The 1860s were indeed a time of destitution in Ireland. Millions of people had died during the Great Hunger. Millions had been forcibly removed from the country. Millions had emigrated to America, Canada, anywhere to escape indeed the destitution of our country. And Leo Casey sought to inspire the people through the medium of song. He wrote that song reminding the folks of the efforts to bring liberty and freedom to Ireland back in the 1798 rebellion. And when he wrote it, Leo Casey was very smart. He found there was an from the folks in Ireland that were eager to learn about the history. The English language was not spoken by everybody in Ireland, but Keegan sought to bring indeed inspiration into community through song. And this song became hugely popular across Ireland, across the Irish diaspora in America and Canada, and it became so popular that it came to notice of the authorities. And Leo Casey used to publish small little booklets with his songs, The Rising of the Moon, My Hair. He published them and sell them very, very cheaply to people to inspire them through song. His songs were considered seditious and treasonable, and he was put into jail. Now, Victorian prisons in Ireland were not just a means of incarceration, they were indeed chambers of death, because Leo Casey was put into a cell that was filled with water. He had to live, sleep, and eat in that cell for 6 months. And of course it had a desired effect. He got pneumonia and he died at the young age of 26. He's buried in Glasnevin Cemetery in Dublin, Glasnevin. And he's buried alongside one of my close friends, Abel McMosh, who was from the same district as me in Dublin, Inchicore. There were 50,000 mourners at his funeral. Many of the people that attended his funeral did so out of respect for the songs that he wrote, because they loved them. They loved the message that it brought, the hope and inspiration that it brought to them and their families. So, Leo Casey's death, for many people, particularly in his native Westmeath and his native district in the Midlands, was taken very personally. There were many that walked, indeed, from the Midlands to Glasnevin and walked back, indeed, after paying the respects to him. Now, you won't see Leo Casey's history or the social trauma that it caused in the community in any of the history books in Ireland. But his song is still sung. I was speaking to Paddy Clancy, and I had a wonderful relationship with Paddy. He was such a generous man. And I asked him, I said, Paddy, why did you choose The Rising of the Moon for the title of your first album that you made? And he said, you know, it was such a popular song here in America that everybody would ask for that song. And the reason they did so was because of Leo Casey. Leo Casey, the school teacher. And that brings us to the very heart, indeed, of what I've done and what Irish songs have meant to the Irish people down through the years. His story is the epitome of the struggle that Irish people have had, indeed, to record their history, to let their feelings be known, and indeed to give the world their view of what happened to our country over the last 1,000 years. Most people in Ireland are very well aware in the 18th and 19th century of the very powerful nature of early Irish society. And to go back to the very beginning and to give you an understanding of why music has been very important to the Irish people, I want to start by reminding you that Ireland geographically is close to Britain and Europe, who was never invaded or conquered by the Romans. And Europe was to benefit greatly from that, because Ireland had lived on the periphery of Europe and had evolved into a society that was very different indeed from that which existed in the rest of the European countries. And an important fact to remember is that during the power of the Roman Empire, music became very much part of the social life of Ireland. Now, if any of you have read the lives of the early Irish saints, or read the lives indeed of the early Irish nobles and chieftains, you know that many of them were musicians. Many of them indeed were poets, and poetry and music filled the lives of many of the most respected saints of the period from the 4th to the 10th century. St. Columcille was a bard of exceptional skill. He played a harp, and many of the saints, both women and men, indeed, that were venerated in Irish communities were musicians. Many of the nobles were indeed musicians. So music was indeed, for many Irish people, a part and parcel of the social life. It was there for celebration, it was there for recording of our history, it was there indeed to for people to enjoy and entertain each other. So, in many respects, music has never been separated from the Irish people. And I just want to quote a very nice piece of literature that was said by Padraig Pearse. And Padraig Pearse, as many of you know, paid a visit to the United States in 1914. And he addressed the Brooklyn Academy. And he, when addressing the Brooklyn Academy, he had this to say about our music. I think I leave it till I find it. But my apologies about that. I have the quote there, but in as far as what he was saying, he said if the Irish race had never written a line, if the tales and romances or mythological tales had never had a being, if the only thing that we had was our music, it would be sufficient to prove for all time the glorious capabilities of the Irish race. In its own special way, music has been the guardian angel of the Irish race. It has watched over the infancy of our earliest developments. It has educated, elevated, and refined them, and in it has followed the exiled children to the furthermost parts of the earth. It has united a scattered nation in a bond of patriotic love. To strengthen this bond is the duty of Irish musicians. And when the trumpet notes of liberty shall sound at last, God alone shall tell what place music has played in the great scheme. Now they're the words of Hubert Rooney. You probably never heard of the name Hubert Rooney. The first quote was from Foggy Dew. But Hubert Rooney was like myself and like Leo Casey. He seen the value indeed of the song lore of Ireland and wanted to give it an artistic value. And the artistic value indeed for any Irish heritage and culture has always had to struggle for acceptance. And as most of you know, you don't need me to tell you that when England sought to conquer Ireland, it not only wanted to have the land and the submission of the Irish people, but they also wanted to destroy Irish heritage and language and music, which makes indeed English attempts to conquer Ireland very different from many of the European countries. Because there are many neighbours across Europe that sought to conquer their neighbours, but they had respects for the arts and talents of the people they wanted to conquer. And that makes the English attempt at colonial conquest in Ireland very different. Because they just didn't want to do that. They wanted to make us English. And they wanted to indeed rid the country of its language, its pastimes, its history, and above all its history. Because no English or Irish university indeed placed any value on what I've just talked about the lives of very Christian Ireland, and the lives of the saints and the nobles, and the laws that existed in our countries. It wasn't until the 18th century that really any of our academics paid any attention indeed to anything that existed in Ireland prior to the coming of the English. So, in many ways, our traditions and our history indeed are very lucky to be here today. It was thought at one time, particularly during the 17th century, that Ireland was conquered, and that its music and its song indeed were dead. But that didn't happen, because there was a very powerful, indeed long tradition of passing indeed the heritage and culture from generation to generation in an oral way. And of course when the 18th century came along, it became indeed much easier to pass on tradition and to propagate indeed our history and our music because of the printed word. So in many ways, over the years that England attempted to conquer the country, they hadn't just one Ireland to conquer, they had hundreds of Irelands to conquer. Because there was, indeed, every community had its own jurisdiction, and there was one great difference between what existed in Ireland and what existed in England, inasmuch that under the English system of feudalism, the way it operated, the king had absolute power. In Ireland, the chieftain had power, but the Irish drew a distinction between the power and the ownership of the land. That was unheard of in Ireland. So that there was a distinction between the Irish chieftains, they had control over their areas, but they owned neither the people, the land. They only had power over the people. They didn't own the land. So when the English came into Ireland and tried to impose this solution and the system of government, it was unheard of in Ireland. So there was a natural reaction both from the bards and from the poets, and the first rebel song that I could find was probably the Coolin. And the Coolin was written back in the 14th century. And there was a fashion amongst the Irish to wear their hair in a long type of pigtail, and that was called a Coolin. And I think it was in the 14th century, a law was brought in forbidding the Irish, the English settlers, to intermarry with the native Irish. And the Coolin was written as a lament of this lady bemoaning the fact that she couldn't marry indeed a native Irish man because of this law. And this law was probably the first indeed ever that apartheid ever been tried indeed by any government to keep races separate. And the song and the tune is a very beautiful one. And of course it's written in the Gaelic language. Now, there are three languages that Irish songs are written in: Latin, Gaelic, English, and there's a very small portion of songs written in French. When indeed the Norman, French, English came to Ireland, the songs were written for a time in Wexford in French, but by and large, the songs that are associated with Irish culture and song lore are written in Gaelic and in English. There's a lot of songs in Latin, and if we go back to the lives of the Irish saints, there's a wonderful book written by John Cannon O'Hanlon, The Lives of the Irish Saints, in which he gives examples of these songs and poems that were written in tribute to both nature and indeed spiritual men and women, and also, of course, hymns to the Almighty. And these songs fill the lives of many of the saints and nobles at the time. Now, I want to stop it there and I want to sing another song. And sometimes I've often thought that many of the airs that we sing today, and I have sung all my life, were very old airs. As you probably know, authors and composers took old airs and put new words to them in every generation. So the song I'm going to sing now is about the 1916 rebellion. It's called The Foggy Dew. But the music was written back in the 18th century. And it was taken down by Edward Bunting, who was the first man to collect the music and write it down. He wrote it in the 18th century. Now, the 18th century was a powerful period in Ireland, as it was here in America. There's a relationship between the two and the development because of the printed word and because of indeed the new ideas that were circulating among communities all over the world. So Edward Bunting decided that the remnants of what he perceived was a very proud and distinctive artistic talent of the Irish people, the playing of music, the harping tradition, should be indeed acknowledged and all brought together. So he organised a very big meeting of all the musicians at Granard in County Longford. And eventually he had a general meeting of every one of them in Belfast in 1792. Now, Bunting was English. The first book that was written about Irish song was also written by a woman who was from, if you like, the privileged ascendancy, Charlotte Brooke. And Charlotte Brooke wrote a book about the relics of the Irish bards. And that was the first time that an acknowledgement was given and that there was something of artistic merit in what the Irish people celebrated in their music and song before the coming of the English. The 18th century, as many of you know, for this country was revolutionary, and in fact, it was a lot of those revolutionary ideas came from Ireland. Ireland, indeed, in the 18th century, had a powerful population. There were 5 million people in Ireland in 1800. Almost the same population is there today. There were 6 million in the whole country. But in 1800 there were 5 million. There were 5 million people in this country in America, and there was roughly 10 or 11 million people in the whole of Britain. So, indeed, by the end of the 18th century, Ireland had a powerful audience for music. Music, indeed, during the 18th century in Ireland, particularly, indeed, from 1860 to, from 1760 to 1800, there was a huge development in, indeed, the making of instruments in Ireland. I think there were 16, I have it in one of my CDs, there were 16 mute instrument makers in Dublin that made instruments. There was a parliament in Dublin. Now this parliament, as many of you know, was not representative of the Irish people. It was representative of the 10% of the ascendancy and the Protestant elite. 90% of the people had no say in it, and they were all Catholic. But even to this day, there's no book that covers the history of the 18th century in its entirety. There are little bits here and little bits there. It's the most underwritten part, I believe, of Irish history. Because we have the wonderful development of Turlough O'Carolan, who indeed, his music became, indeed, the musical representation of Georgian Ireland. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the music of O'Carolan. I'll ask the guys to play a piece of it, and I'm sure you'll recognise it. It's a piece called Carolan's Receive. And this piece of music was played in Francis Tavern in New York in 1784, when George Washington had a celebration after the British had left New York. Carolan's Receive. Gary on guitar. Let's have a Gary. Larry Nugent, I'm sure you all know, one of the great musicians of Ireland. And my own young Wolfe Tone, a lady that's been playing music for the last 8-9 years, Damaris Woods on the banjo. Now, why is Turlough O'Carolan important? Well, Turlough O'Carolan revolutionised Irish music. And there were a lot of the patriotic aristocracy in Ireland that wanted to make him the national bard of Ireland. And there was a man called Robert Owenson. And he decided that all of this power and recognition for Irish tradition was not coming from the native Irish people because they had no power. It was coming from, indeed, the settled Protestant community who were expected by English administrations in London to be seeking a British identity, but they were not doing it. They were looking inward to Ireland for an Irish identity. And this horrified the people in London, because this meant that people like Bunting, people indeed like Charlotte Brooke, they were not seeking to have a British identity, but indeed they saw the value where they were living and wanted an Irish identity. So Robert Owenson decided that he would collect all Carolyn's tunes and he put them into an opera. And he presented that opera in 1783. And that opera was called Patrick the Poor Soldier. Now, when I first seen this, I didn't see it in Ireland, I seen it in America. I was in Philadelphia. And I was going through books and I was working on my CD about Washington's Irish. And I found this book, The Music That George Washington Knew. It was written by a man called Ames Fisher. Beautiful book. And I opened the first page and I seen this song, Patrick the Poor Soldier. And I looked at the words, and the words were, though Leixlip is proud of its cold shady bowers, its great falling waters and murmuring cascades. Now I live about 2 miles away from Leixlip. So I thought, what does George Washington have to do with Leixlip? So I had to dig then deep and find out, of course, that the music was originally written by O'Carolan. It was collected, put into an opera in Dublin. It was first performed in the Fishamble Street Theatre, and then it was taken to New York. And within 9 months, it was performed in New York. And that's how fast the music travelled across the Atlantic. It was in New York. It became George Washington's favourite piece of theatre. He used to have it performed in Philadelphia when he came, but it also became his favourite rebel piece because the show was banned in Dublin, and George knew this. So he had it performed to get up the noses, indeed, of the English authorities. And, you know, there's wonderful music in it, but the sad thing about it is that Turlough O'Carolan is not credited with that music. And, you know, I can't prove it, but I'm along with many other musicologists that believe that Turlough O'Carolan wrote the music for the Star Spangled Banner. And that'd be some distinction for Irish, indeed, musicians, if that's the case. I don't have a recording, but I certainly have music that sounds awful like it. And the same is true of many of the early tunes that were popularised here in America. Irish music, indeed, was part of the celebration of music across this country in during the colonial times. And much of it, indeed, was Irish, and much of it was satire. There's one great thing that Irish composers and authors, they were very good at satire. And I want to sing a little song that was written in Philadelphia about, as many of you know, during the American Revolution, there was lots of rebel songs. And this one, before the Revolution, there was propaganda put out by the British authorities that the war would be over within 6 months, that the rebels would fall apart at the first confrontation, that they didn't know how to fire their guns. And the same type of propaganda was put out in Ireland. And I always give, indeed, the English authorities great credit for they have been in the business for cultural control since Queen Elizabeth I. She was the first lady that started, indeed, not only just political control, but cultural control of a community. And that, so, you're only newcomers here in America. You didn't start in the 1930s, but they have a long history of it. So, when this song was written in Philadelphia, it was written to make fun of the British Army that had been defeated at Lexington and Concord. And it was written by some Irish guy, Don Dasmy. He never put his name to it, because, well, he didn't know what way the war was going to go. But it's this very simple title called The Irishman's Epistle. And I'll sing it for you here now. And I hope I can remember it. You recognize the tune? Yeah. By me fate, you all think are makers of bulls, with your brains in your breeches and ass in your skulls. Get home with your muskets and put up your swords, and look in your books for the meaning of wars. For you see now, me honeys, how much you're mistaken, for concord by discord can never be taken. Oh, you see now, me honeys, how wrong you can be. Such a medley of people could never agree. You went out with your red coats all bright, and thought to be frightening the folks at the sight. And when you got there, how they pounded your puns, and all the way home, how they peppered your buns. But you see now, me honeys, a comical crack, to be proud in the face and be shot in the back. Oh, you see now, me honeys, sure it's nothing at all, but you pull up the trigger and pop goes the ball. Well, the British fired first, and we all stood our ground. No troopers of courage were there to be found, and they scattered and ran while our muskets refilled, and they never stopped running till they reached Bunker Hill. We besieged them and teased them with fifers and drummers. Our militias declared they were very good runners. And the sound of a treat all our riflemen cheered, and the whole of New Hampshire it laughed and it jeered. It's a tricky verse. When the exiles of Europe first came to these shores, they were met with the Baptists, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians, the Protestants, the Papists, and the Huguenots. Such a medley of people could never agree, but good sense it prevailed, and we lived peacefully. But the stamp-backed and redcoats disturbed our tranquility, and we fought a great fight to the best of ability. Lexington and Concord is where first we drew blood, and where liberty's banner unveiled was stood. That's it. Yeah, well that song in the airport written in Philadelphia in 1776. And God bless the man that wrote it. He had a definitely a wonderful sense of humour. And that satire runs through all Irish songs. We had the man who wrote our national anthem, the soldier song, Paddy Carney, he was a great man to write satirical songs. Now he wrote the soldier song, and as many of you know, soldiers, you know the song, and you know, he wrote that in 1908. And it was sung, of course, by the volunteers, those people who fought and gave us the measure of freedom that we have today in Ireland. It was sung by them. It was sung indeed in Scotland by the Scottish-Irish community. They sung it, and they popularised it, really. They made it a popular song. And it was sung at the football matches where Glasgow Celtic would play. It was sung indeed by the Irish when they would go out to drill. And then eventually, when Ireland got its freedom, or 26 counties, in 1922, we were looking around for a national anthem and decided that the soldier song would fit the bill. And it was translated then into Gaelic. It was never written in Gaelic. It was written in English. So, but Paddy Carney, the man who wrote the words, he was a great man to write satirical songs, and he wrote a song called God Bless England. And I'm sure many of you might have heard that song. I'll sing you a song. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day, whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. So we say hip hooray, God bless England is our prayer. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. Now when we were savage, fierce and wild, whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. She came like a mother to her child. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. She gently raised us from the slime and kept our homes from want and crime and sent us to heaven in her own good time. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. So we say hip hooray, come and join the IRA. Whack fulla diddle fulla die do day. Now that's Paddy Carney, you know, that is, the satirical side of Irish songs has always been there, because when Sir Robert Peel introduced police into Ireland back in the 1820s, there was a poet down in Tipperary that didn't like the idea that there was such a peaceful community in this district. The idea of sending down police with bayonets to indeed patrol was not taken kindly by the native population. So they satirised indeed the whole situation with a song called The Peeler and the Goat. So he lived in a small little town called Banship in Tipperary, and the song went like this. Oh, the Banship peelers went one night on duty and patrolling, oh, and they met a goat upon the road and took him for being a strolling, oh. With bayonets fixed they sallied forth and cut him by the whizzing, oh. And then they swore a mighty oath they'd send him off to prison, oh. So it's the whole, the goat says, oh mercy sir, the goat replied, come let me tell me story, yo. I am no rogue, no ribbon man, no croppy Whig or Tory, yo. I'm guilty not of any crime, of petty high treason, oh. For me tribe is wanted at this time, for this is ranting season, oh. And it goes on for 40 verses. And I'm not kidding you, but I got into terrible trouble over that song. And when I was very young, I was down in Tipperary one Sunday, and there was a football match on, and I decided I went to this pub and have a drink, and somebody asked me to sing a song, and I sung it. But what I didn't know was that the local superintendent of the guards was sitting up with two of the sergeants sitting at the counter. And of course I sung this song, and you know, of course I was probably set up with the fact that many in the pub knew this. So I sung the song anyway, and of course to the great applause and amusement of all the customers. Because they knew what was going on. Poor Derek had been put into the lion's den. And of course, when I came out at that time, pubs used to close at 2:30 on a Sunday. There was two guards standing at my car. And one of them said, "This your car?" I said, "Yes." And he says, "Can I test the brakes?" So he tested the brakes, and anyway, put a long story short, he gave me a summons. I had one bald tire. It was a bald tire, and that's the only thing he could find wrong with it. So, of course, I had to go to court for it, because they had made such a spectacle of it, of course, and the judge seen the humour in it. And of course it was thrown out, but I mean, it just goes to show that, like, there's always been a conflict with authority in Ireland, and because, you know, the British had laws on the statute books in Ireland that they never enforced, but they always had them there in reserve, just in case. And I always tell the story, indeed, about the ballad singers Zosimus. Now, when Zosimus lived in Dublin, And this is at a time when Ireland was very, very populous. And I told you there was 5 million people in Ireland in 1800. By the time of 1830, there was probably 8 million. And that's a huge population. And of course, many of that population were the great supporters of the song and music law that I play and sing. And they loved it. And it's said that some of Zosima's penny broadsheets, he used to publish the little sheets of songs he would write, that say they sold for a penny. And he would sell them, and he'd sing the songs, and of course the folks would buy them, and that's how the ballad singers made their living. But the government brought in an act saying that the songs, if they were seditious or treasonable, there could be a sentence of 6 months. So many of the ballad singers, if they got a 3-month prison sentence, it was a badge of honour for singing a song. And of course, the Zosimus decided that he would give the sheets out free, and he would carry a bunch of straw, and he charged a penny for the straw. So he'd go around the crowd and he'd charge the penny for the straw, and he'd give the ballad sheet free. And he'd say, he's quoted as saying, this is not Kildare straw, Dublin straw, Wicklow straw, but it's real repeal of the Union straw. And of course, repeal of the Union was Dan O'Connell's indeed platform to bring the Parliament back to Ireland in the 1830s. I think that was the golden age of the ballad singer in Ireland. The golden age of the street entertainer. He had to be able to sing a song and write a song that would hold the attention of a crowd, and he had to do it in such a way, indeed, that it was entertaining, but also he had to educate. They did both. And after the Great Hunger, this sophisticated, indeed, talent for writing these songs went out of the street entertainment. The audience that indeed supported people like Zosimus all died. They were the poorest. Now I can't tell you, indeed, how much the Great Hunger affected the pastimes and heritage of Irish music. We're very lucky to have what we have today. It had such a devastating effect on our musical history and tradition. And you don't have to take my word for that. The great collector of Irish music, George Petrie. Now George Petrie his folks were from Scotland. He was born in 1799, and he had a great admiration for Edward Bunting. Now you might notice that both of those men I've mentioned came from these, indeed, a privileged English settler class. But they both seemed to value, indeed, in Irish tradition. Edward Bunting, indeed, was so marginalised by those who set artistic standards in Ireland when he died in 1836. When he died, George Petrie said these words. He died without a word, sentence uttered by anybody in by any pen, pamphlet or publication. He died indeed without a word or a sentence written about him. And here's the man that recorded and that wrote down our first musical notations in modern times. And he died in 1836 without any acknowledgement. And of course, George Petrie was horrified at this. And George Petrie spent his life, indeed, trying to give a heightened value to Irish tradition. If you ever go to Ireland and you visit the Round Towers, it was George Petrie who, indeed, gave us the definitive book on the Round Towers of Ireland. It still has not been surpassed. A wonderful book that indeed goes through the history and the the architecture that's involved in the building and why they were built, and the speculation on the different theories that are behind it. But it's a wonderful book. George Petrie, to me, is one of the greats of Irish. He ranks alongside, indeed, Captain Francis O'Neill here in Chicago. Because George Petrie in Ireland did what Chief O'Neill did here in Chicago some 20 years later. And I always quote the words of George Petrie when he said, in 1852, "The land of song is no longer tuneful, and if the music I hear, it's only the cry and the wail for the dead. There's no song in Ireland." Ireland, indeed, was destitute of music in the 1850s. And of course, people like George Petrie, who had such a value on our traditions of music and song, were horrified with this. So he set about to collect, indeed, and bring together the remnants, as he felt, of the Irish heritage of music that was still alive in the country. And he went around at his own expense, to collect that music. It's a wonderful book, indeed, that has been republished. His literature is very hostile towards those who set artistic standards in London, and the book was republished in England, but they would not put in his literature. His literature was omitted because he was placing blame, indeed, on the deaths of the millions of Irish people on the government where it lay. And he couldn't do that in Victorian Ireland. Any academic, indeed, that did so at the peril of their job. How many fixed for time? What time? 25 p.m. I won't finish at that, and I'll be here tomorrow at 4. What time?
We're supposed to be 3:45, but this is 3:45 on the thing.
Yeah, it was
4:30. It's supposed to be
4:30 was the original
4:30.
time.
4:30 tomorrow. What is
It
it?
says 3:45 on the programme. It wasn't.
3:45 on the programme. So if you check with the programme if you want to hear more about it. I'll be speaking more so tomorrow about the effect of Irish music on America. And I have lots of CDs and tapes over there. I'll take any quick questions that you have. The Foggy Dew.
Yes.
Yes. And we're going to finish up with this song, The Foggy Dew. Now, if you have any quick questions, just fire them out and I'll try and answer them. Yes?
Yes, sir. How much of an influence did Irish history and Irish music have on the American Civil War music? I mean, a lot of the tunes of our Civil War come straight from Ireland. Were there a lot of Irish writers here in the United States and a lot of publishers, music publishers, aware of that? You released several CDs with both Union and Confederate music that if you change the words, they might just as well have been written in Kilkenny or Dublin. Is that an accident?
Absolutely. Great question. The question is there, how much influence did Irish music have on the development and the heritage of music that you have today in the Civil War? Samuel Lover was an author and a writer of songs. He entertained people in Ireland playing the piano. He wrote great songs. Rory O'Moore is one of his most popular songs. It's on one of my CDs. He came to America in 1842 and he played in Washington. And there were so many of the Congress and so many of the people from the Senate going to the concert that they adjourned. They adjourned the houses of Congress and Senate so that everyone could enjoy Samuel Lover's concert. Now, Irish music has been part of American musical entertainment since the Irish people first came here. As I told you, Patrick the Poor Soldier was George Washington's favourite song. George Washington loved music, and his daughter, indeed the music teacher he had, was from Dublin and lived in Alexandria. All of his secretaries to George Washington were all Irish. So Irish music has been part and parcel of American heritage of music since Irish people first came here. And what solidified that really was Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster, his Irish mother, indeed, his ability to take the sounds and music that he heard in the community and to put them into beautiful song. And of course, during the Civil War, there were more people living in Ireland here in America from Ireland, and in the south and in the north. And of course, as many of you know, the national anthem of the south, the Bonnie Blue Flag, is an Irish song. Get hurrah, hurrah, for civil rights around, hurrah, for the Bonnie Blue Flag that waves a single star. That's an Irish song that was written in Dublin back in the 1850s, the Irish jaunting cart. And it was a fellow called Harry McCarthy went to Jefferson Davis and says, I have a great song to rally the troops. Great song to rally the troops. He says, and of course, when all the secession states got together in Montgomery, they adopted this song as the national anthem. And the same is true of the North. So yes, the answer is yes. I mean, Irish music is all over, indeed, all over this country. And my apologies to the person who's up next, by the way, because I was late starting. And is it yourself?
It is not.
No. But I won't finish. Is there any other question? Quick question, maybe? No. Come along tomorrow and we continue if you're around. Because I'm doing something that I'd love to speak about. History Foggy Dew, and I'm going to ask. I know most of you know Larry. He's a wonderful musician, and this tune was taken by Edward Bunting from one of the last Gaelic speakers in County Down in around 1750, 1760. And the tune again was used by a County Down man, Peter O'Neill, when he wrote the Foggy Dew 150 years later, or 100 years later. So, Larry. As down the glen one Easter morn, the city fair rolled I. There are lines of marching men, its squadrons pass me by. No blades in the gun, no battle drum, the sound is loud and true, but the angels fell on the
and all I've done